Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Maseches Megillah Daf Chav Daled. We're going to be starting 2 lines from the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Beis and going to the last line of Chav Daled Amud Beis. Let's get started with a brand new Mishnah. Hakori b'Torah lo yivchos mishlosha psukim. Every aliyah that we lane has to be a minimum of 3 psukim. We'll see why in the Gemara. Below yikra lemeturgaman yosmi pasuk echad. But for as much as it's true, you can have 3 psukim. You can't lane 3 psukim and then have the maturgaman, the translator, explain things. That can only be 1 pasuk at a time. However, if the translator was translating Navi, top of Chavdalad and Menalef with a Navi, Shlosha, then he can do 3 psukim at a time. Now, Rashi at the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Beis explains why it is that it's okay for him to do more than 1 pasuk by Navi, but not okay for him to do more than 1 pasuk as it relates to the Torah. And Rashi writes at the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Beis, it's too much for him to remember. He might make a mistake and he might therefore end up with a scenario where he teaches a halacha, teaches something in the Torah which is incorrect. But by Navi, we're less concerned about that. And Rashi on the top says explicitly, strangely almost, Im Yirtze, if he wants to do 3 psukim, he can. We don't care if he makes a mistake. That's a lot. That's a big statement to make. We do learn Dinei D'Rabbanan from Tanakh all the time. We learn Minhagim. We learn a lot of things from Tanakh. It's a very difficult Rashi in regards to the way that we don't rely on the Maturgaman as much. Maybe it wasn't the din in the Navi. Maybe everybody knew the Maturgaman wasn't as reliable. That's what the Mishnah writes. Top of Chavdalad, let's continue. Hayashlashtan shalosh parshios. If all 3 psukim in Navi that he's reading are 3 different topics, then Koran echad echad. Then you really should, even the Maturgaman should say them in separately. And Medalgin b'Navi, one is allowed to skip while reading Navi from one spot to another spot. But ve'ein Medalgin b'Torah, but you cannot skip in the Torah. We should all be thinking instantly about a dynasty, Rabbi Chal Moshe. So we know that by that laning we do skip. We'll have to explain that in the Gemara today. That question is not asked in the Gemara directly, but it's asked in concept, and we'll get to it. When one is reading Navi and skipping from place to place, how much can he skip? He can, as much time as it takes for the Maturgaman to translate, we're talking about a couple of rolls of the cloth. Nothing. It's not a few seconds, whatever it is. So says the Gemara, we had said in the beginning of the Mishnah that if you have an aliyah, it has to be a minimum of 3 psukim. Hani gimel psukim keneged me. Why do we have 3 psukim? What does it correlate to? Says the Gemara, Amar Avasi keneged Torah nevi'im uksuvim. This is a very interesting, I don't understand this fully. Why is it that we need this? It's all Torah. Why do we Torah Nevi'im Ksuvim? Maybe to say that the whole canon is divine. It's a distinction between us and some of the other nations around us, as to whether or not even the New Testament, some of the authors of the New Testament, Befem Mali, said that it wasn't divine and it was meant to be written in a way that people would listen to it more than it would be anything. Right? The Torah wasn't written for people to listen to it per se. It was written however Hashem wanted it to. Whether or not it was friendly was irrelevant. So anyways, that could be, but either way, the minimum requirement of 3 psukim, if anybody asks at the Shabbos table, is that 1 pasuk represents Torah, 1 represents Nevi'im, and 1 represents Ksubim. 6 lines down, Chav Daled Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, and then we had said in our Mishnah, so the summary of the Mishnah that we just gave is that in the Torah, the Maturgam can only do 1 pasuk at a time. In Navi, he can do up to 3. However, even in Navi, if there are 3 separate topics in the 3 psukim, then you have to separate them. Kigon, what's the example where you have to separate the 3 psukim in Tanakh? Happens to be my bar mitzvah parsha from Parsha Shoftim the Haftorah. Kicho Amar Hashem Chinam Nimkartem. Kicho Amar Hashem Elokim Mitzrayim Yeredi Mi Barishana. Ve'atam Malifonu Umashem. These 3 topics are 3 different topics, and therefore the Maturgaman is not allowed to do all 3 of them together. He has to do them separately, even though it's Navi. Says the Gemara, we had said in our Mishnah, about 12 lines down at the 2 dots, Medalgin. Says the Gemara, that's not true. When the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur would read Urminhi, we have a source in the Tanaim that says that he would read Acharemos and then Be'ach Be'asor. And if you look on the side here and see where these 2 psukim are, one's in Vayikra Tes Zayin and one's in Vayikra Chav Gimel, which in Klaf is not a lot. Every column is 40, 50 psukim. I don't know. It's a lot. So we can cover that ground very quickly. But nevertheless, we see that we are medalig. You said in the Mishnah that we're not medalig in Torah. That's not correct. We are medalig in Torah. So Amar Abaye. Abaye says, Lo kasha kan b'chdei sheyifsakam haTorah v'kan b'chdei shelo yifsakam haTorah. It depends. It really depends how long the break is. And maybe it's the case that as long as the break in Torah is short, so then as long as the Maturgaman is able to finish what he's trying to say, then all is well and good. Says the Gemara, that doesn't work. We're a third of the way down. We learned that the distinction that you just gave of whether or not the Turgaman could finish in time was a distinction that was given in our Mishnah about the Navi, not about Torah. The Allah, What did it say in our Mishnah? How much of a deal can there be? And the Gemara and Mishnah had said, that was talking about Navi. That it seems to be that when it comes to Torah, you can't do any skipping at all. So how then did the Kohen Gadol skip? And we'll overlay our question. How then by Tennessee, where can we skip when it comes to the third Aliyah there? Second, where do we skip? We skip by the third? Can't remember. One of the three Aliyahs. So we start, and then we skip in the Tennessee wars. It says the Gemara, you're right. This is the second answer that the Gemara is going to accept. It's different when it's one inyan, just like by Tennessee where it fits perfectly. By Tennessee where it's all one topic, and therefore it's one inyan. And even if you are medaleg, that's fine. V'hatanya, and this v'hatanya Rashi highlights for us is bini chusa. We know, of course, that in general v'hatanya, the hey hashe'ela implies that there's a question. Here there is no question. This v'hatanya is bini chusa. And then the Gemara says v'hatanya, the raya is that medalgin b'torah be'inyan echad u'v'navi that you're even allowed in Navi to skip around, even if it's two different topics. And however, under both circumstances, by Torah when it's only one topic, and by Navi even when it's two, you're allowed to skip, but it has to be in a way where the Turgaman has not yet finished. Lastly, in this section, Tanya Idach, we have a brisa that speaks about the following: Ein medalgin Navi mi Navi l'Navi. I can't go from Sefer Yoshua to Sefer Shoftim. That's not appropriate. You can't do that. However, uvenavi shel shnei masar medalek. When it comes to Trei Asar, Yoel, all of them are all in the same books, and then that's perfectly fine. That you're allowed to skip. But you can't go from the beginning of Trei Asar to the end of Trei Asar, but from one in the middle to another one, that's no problem at all. They're all so short, no problem at all. The Mishnah, 2/3 of the way down, Chav Daled and Aleph. Let's continue. After we read the Torah, we read the Navi. The Gemara considers this to be a lowly aliyah. It's not nice to be able to only read the Haftarah. It's considered a denigration. Hamaftir b'Navi, because he got such a lowly gift of getting Navi, we look at the Maftir. It's like, wow, such a chashav azach. You asked me to do Maftir. Maybe you're going to ask me.
That's the reason.
That what?
The Maftir is only 3 psukim, and the other 7 are.
They're also they're minimum of 3. No, but here we're not even talking about that. Hamaftir ben Navi. We're talking about one who reads Haftarah. Forget the Aliyah for a moment. That's what we're going to discuss. That Hamaftir ben Navi, one who actually reads the Navi, who he gets in place of his lack of kavod for being asked to read the Navi. He gets the following kibudim: Upores al Shema. He gets to lead the davening, as we discussed yesterday. Big machlokas rishonim between Tosos and Rashi, and within Rashi there's a ran on the Rashi, and just a whole big tumult about what this means. Pores al Shema. But the way we learned yesterday, based on Rashi, and the way that a lot of the Mefarshim explain, is Pores al Shema is when one is in a scenario where they can say Baruch Hu, Chatzi Kaddish, and the first brach of Kriya Shema for somebody else, that's considered a Maila. And that, like, for people who have yet to be Yotzei Shachar. So if a guy gets Maftir ben Navi, so then he merits Poris al Shema, who over Lifnei HaTeva, he can be the Chazan. This is probably where the custom came from, that the guy who's davening Haftorah ends up davening Musaf. It's probably, it has its roots in this source, because Nebuchadnezzar knew that they gave you Haftorah, l'chol hapachos, you should have a nice thing to come out of it, which is that you're the Chazan. And as well, who knows Seas Kappa, he can do Nesias Kappaim. Great. This is a difficult line as well. What does it mean? Who knows Seas Kappa? You're either a Kohen, right? You're either a Kohen or you're not a Kohen. Whether or not you got Haftorah, what's the nafkamina? That's very interesting. That's what it says. And Rashi here doesn't say boo. Nobody. It's very interesting. So Rashi, if you look at Tosfos on the bottom here, he's already going into the next sugya. Dibur maschil ve'ein no se kapav mashma ha'im hevi beis se'aros yisa kapav. Or this is talking about a katan. That's the next section actually. Anyways, let's continue in the Mishnah. Ve'im haya katan. If this person who was reading the Haftarah was a katan, I remember when I was a little kid, we were in South Carolina. Where does Garfinkel live? South Carolina still? So I think we were there with them, and I ended up in Shul. We were there for Shabbos once, and I ended up laning Maftir. Just the last 5-6 psukim. You're a katan's allowed to do that. It was a repeat. It's totally mutter. That's fine for a child. I've done it a handful of times over the years as a little kid. The Maya katan, so that's fine if he reads Haftarah. But Avivo Rabo over in Al Yado, then they're the ones who are the beneficiaries, all the good things that were to come about, because he's a kid, he can't be a chazan. Katan, Kore B'Torah U'Metargim, he could read the Torah and translate it. Aval, Eino Poris Al Shema, he cannot lead the tzibor for the first bracha of Shema. Then over Lifnei HaTeva, he can't be a chazan. Then no Nosias Kappa, and he cannot do Nesias Kappa. Then the Gemara gets to the sugya. I guess the equivalent would be possibly wearing shorts when you're davening for the tzibor. It's a good question. Are you allowed to do that? So the Mishnah says, Pocheach Pores. This requires research. The person who's pocheach is poris es shema u'metargim. What does pocheach mean? Just to our right in Rashi dibur maskul pocheach, the Maseches Sofer Mefarish, kol shekira of nirin, where his legs, seemingly his calves are showing, because thighs in halacha are shok. And here it seems to say that even if your legs are showing. However, Tosfos doesn't like this. Tosfos, 4 Tosfos and down, third of the way down, dibur maskul pocheach, arum, you have to mamish be undressed, v'yachev and barefoot. But pirush hakuntras, mitargimin artilayu pache v'leisa, the pache hu targum shel arum. Pache doesn't mean leg, it means naked, it means undressed. And maybe we're not talking about arum like with erva mamish, but if most of your, that's its own sugya. We learned about this in brachos. If a person's sitting in the sand and is covering the person's body enough, then what can they read and what can they not read? So Tosfos here seems to take a different approach. And if you look at the end of the Tosfos, Zachein Pirush of Alphys, the Pachizeu Osa Shalosh Begadim Kruim. It's like the torn jeans routine. Like sometimes we see that as a little bit of a trendy type of clothing. That we're talking about torn clothes that reveal a lot of the body, not just calves. We're talking about somebody who's wearing tattered clothes or intentionally tattered clothes. How does that work? So if you're wearing those clothes, are you allowed to be chazan? So that's what the Mishnah is talking about. Pocheach. Yes, the Mishnah says that you are pores es shema mitargim. Aval eino kari bator ve'eino over lifnei ateva. You can be pores es shema. You can lead the tzibur for the first part of Shema, and you can be mitargim, but you cannot read the Torah. You also cannot be chazan in general ve'eino over lifnei ateva. So if this is lemaisa like Rashi, that means that if you're wearing shorts, you can't be chazan. We don't paskin here, but that's what the Mishnah seems like according to Rashi. According to Tosfos, if your jeans are fully to the floor, but they're torn jeans, you also can't be chazan. It's not right. If you're a Kohen, you cannot be no seis kapav. You can't do a seis kapayim. What about a blind person? Suma, can he lead? Yeah, Pore says Shema Matargim. He has to say Shema also. He's chayev. Umatargim, he can also be Matargim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol Shelo Ra Me'oros Me'amav. If you've never seen Me'oros, how could you be Pore Sal Shema? You know Pore Sal Shema because what's the first bracha of Birchos Krishma? Yotzer Ha Me'oros. But if you've never seen the Me'oros, how is it possible that you can be chazan? You're not on the same playing field as the people around you who can see. We'll analyze this in the Gemara as well. 7 lines from the bottom. My timer, says the Gemara, why is it that we learned what we learned in the beginning of the Mishnah? That the person who's maftir b'navi gets all these extra kibudim, machlokas and the amoraim, Rav Papa mishum kavod, because it's not respectable to not get something more than that. Rashi over here, mishum kavod, lahavir lefanav hateva ho'olu mamsi alav ladavar she'eno kavodo tiknu lozu lekavod. They gave him something that wasn't kavodik. They gave him haftarah, and to make him feel better, they gave him something that was worthwhile. That's answer number 1. Answer number 2 in the Gemara, Rabbi Barsimi Amar Mishum de Asili Insuye. It used to be that the chazanim were paid, so it could cause for a bit of a machlokas if this guy didn't have a halachic reason for him to be davening. So the halachic reason for him to be davening is that he got haftarah nebach on him, and halacha allows for him to be the bal musaf as well, and it shouldn't cause for machlokas. My beinayu, what's the difference between these two answers about kavod and the asili insuy about possible fighting? That if you have a bal musaf who davens for free, right, in our shul, nobody gets paid to daven in our shul. That's ridiculous. There are shul. Nobody agrees with that. Also. But even those who do, I've done that before. I did that. I've done that before. What?
That's some storage there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because that's not real. That's just to make money. But I have given $36 before for Shali Chin to daven. He's got such a good voice. Love it. Anyways, in this case, the Gemara says it.
$72.
What? Now we're starting. Now we're talking. But I don't want the money to go to the shul at that point. Now I want to. Once it hits a certain threshold, I'm interested in the proceeds. So it says the Gemara, the nafkamina between the two cases, the answer of kavod and the answer of dasi lin suye, is where the chazan is doing this for free. However, the Gemara has a problem with all of this. Tanan, 4 lines from the bottom. We said in the Mishnah, over in al yada, that if the katan was the one who did the haftarah, that his father or Rebbe would be the beneficiaries of all the good things that they're getting, to be poris shema, to be mavri over lifnei ateva. So it says the Gemara, Yamers mishum nitzuye. If you want to say it's because of the fighting, because of the payment, katan bar nitzuye. Who? Are you going to say that a katan is even shaykh to get paid? He's a katan. What kind of payment is he going to get as a kid? Not paying him. What? It's irrelevant. He can't be chazan. How can you pay him to be chazan? It's not even that. It doesn't even go that far. The question doesn't get off the ground. He's a kid. There's nothing to talk about. Says the Gemara, Elamai mishum kavod. Why you're worried about the kid's kavod? He's a 10-year-old. He doesn't know the difference. He's fine. Katan bar kavod. He's not. By the way, this line can be taken out of context. Just don't misunderstand it. It doesn't mean children don't deserve respect. Children deserve Maybe they don't deserve respect, but they deserve fair treatment. Maybe. Okay. But that's what the Gemara says. He's not shaykh to either of them. So therefore, what is it? Ela ika kvod aviv kvod rabo. You're right. The kavod doesn't apply to him, but he has a father and he has a rebbe to whom he can give kavod. Let him give kavod to them. And hachanami here too. Nitzuye aviv nitzuye rabo. And because the father and the rebbe can get it, maybe there will be a fight between the father or the rebbe on one side and the chazan who's paid on the other, and therefore there is such a possibility of the katan. Next, pocheach poris al shema. Let's talk about this case of the person wearing either shorts, according to Rashi, or torn clothes according to Tosfos, top of Chavdal on base second line. What if you have a child who's wearing shorts? Is he allowed to read the Torah? You should be asked, once you're talking about a child, is erva is not erva. Just ask about a child who's not dressed. It doesn't matter. My time alone. It's not nice for a child who's not dressed to do that. It's because of kavod hatzibur. Hachanami, here too, when the child is pocheach, here too, we would say the same thing. Mishum kavod tzibur. It's not nice. You shouldn't do it. What about a blind person? Suma poris al shema, like we said in our Mishnah, Tanya. This was what the Gemara says. They asked the Kash on Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah had said that a person who's never been able to see is not able to be the chazan. He cannot see. He cannot be poris al shema because he can't say yotzer hameoros. So it says the Gemara is a Kasha Tanya Amru lo Rabbi Yehuda harbe tzafu lidrosh b'merkava v'lo ro samimehem. The Ma'aser Merkava is in Tanakh. You know how many people have written svarim on the Ma'aser Merkava? They never saw it. But they looked at the Mefarshim and they were able to see that they understood. So who cares? The Gemara is asking in a derech homily, who cares if you haven't seen the Me'oros? So you don't have to see the Me'oros to have a tfisa of what the Me'oros might be. After all, the Ma'aser Merkava, nobody saw it. One person saw it. That's it. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, how would he answer that? Hasam be'avnisa deliba talya milsa. When it comes to the Merkava, and this is a deep idea, we're only reading the words, but this is a much deeper idea. The question is, how much havanas halev do you have? And the Havanas Halev is not a question of intellect. It's a question, I presume, of some spiritual capacity to learn these deep ideas. Nevuah, Ruach HaKodesh, up there in the upper echelons of access, not down here. So that's Ba'avanta Delibatayim Milza. But V'ha Kamechaven V'yoda. And here, what we're talking about is he needs to know what he's talking about. Yotzer HaMe'oros, and he's never seen light. No. So says the Gemara, Hacha Mishum Hanahu V'ha Lesle Hana. And over here, he's never had the Hana before. Okay. The Rabbanan, what would the rabbi say about this? It's not true. The rabbi say, Islay Hana. The rabbi say he does have Hana, and that's why we allow for him to say Yotzer HaMe'oros. How does a blind person have Hana? How does a blind person have Hana from light? He's blind. Says the Gemara, Ki Rabbi Yossi. Titania, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Kol Yomai Hayisi Mitzar al Mikraz. I had a very hard time with this pasuk. The pasuk reads, Hayisi Mamashesh Betzahoraim, Kasher Yamashesh Ha'iver Ba'afela. I was throwing my hands around in the afternoon, just like when an Iver does at night. Think about that. The Gemara gives an example of a blind person at night. Why do you need both? Says the Gemara, he's blind. He could be looking at the sun. He wouldn't know the difference. And he could be standing in the perfect pitch of black of night. He would have no clue. So why does the pasuk say that it's ha'iver ba'afela? And Rabbi Yossi says, till something actually happened to me. What happened? I was walking, it was very dark out. All the lampposts were out. I saw a blind person that I knew. He was walking with a torch in hand. Amarti lo, b'ni, look respectfully, we know each other well. You're blind. You've got bandages over your eyes. Everybody knows you're blind. You have no whatever. You're blind. What's with the torch? So then he said, Amarli Kozman Shavuka Biyadi B'nei Adam Roan Osi. Every time I'm carrying a torch, everybody comes over to me and says, hey, what are you doing? Why do you need this? And then what do? They save me from ditches in the ground, from thorns and from thistles and from bushes that can hurt me. So what do we see? That light is beneficial to a person who can't see by virtue of other people. And therefore, according to this line of reasoning, a summa is allowed to be the leader of Shema for other people.
Early days blind red stick.
Yeah, conceptually, yeah. Except that was more for his own good. This is not. Fire doesn't help. He's blind. He's carrying a torch, so other people will guide him. It's a little different. It's just in Lamdos.
Yeah, it's an indirect benefit instead of a direct.
Yeah,
benefit.
exactly. Yeah, it's the second. I don't know what the language is. Indirect. That's right. I don't know what the halachic term would be. I don't know. That's the chemistry terminology. Is direct and indirect. Reflected. It's reflected light. What?
Is a blind person in Karesh? I know a deaf person.
Chirish?
Yeah.
Cheresh is a person who's deaf and or mute, depending on the context in Shas. But an Iver or a Summa is the language for a blind person. So Cheresh is about your speech and possibly your hearing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
New Mishnah, a third of the way down, a little bit more, almost halfway down, 2 lines into the wide lines. Chaftal and base. Kohen sheyesh biyadav mumin. If you have a Kohen who's wants to do Nesias Kapayim, but his hands have a mum on them, as I'm missing a finger, whatever it is, lo yisas kapav. He's not allowed to do Nesias Kapayim. Take a look at Rashi, 5 lines from the top of the page. Rashi says, Kohen sheyesh biyadav mumin. The fisha amistaklen bo, because people often are tempted to look at his wound. That's normal. We're going to learn Chagiga, and then we're going to have to learn other Maseches that are much harder. That if a person looks at the hands of a Kohen while he's doing the Siyas Kapayim, Einav Kehos, his eyes will be lightened, his eyes will be weakened. So the Chachamim put a little injunction. We want to make sure that you don't damage your eyes by looking at the Shechina. Maybe we just want to make sure you don't look at the Shechina. Either way, if a person has a blemish of some kind on his hands, and we're afraid that your eyes may trail after his hands because of his blemish, no dice. You should not be doing the Siyas Kapayim. Even if your hands were stained a certain color, like a certain father of mine in the room whose hands were dyed a certain color the day of his wedding. Just saying. Right, Dad? Green. Chemical reaction, permanent dye. Good job. So my dad wore gloves, which was typical in the South anyways, not too shabby. So says the Gemara, what if his hands are covered in paint? Right, his hands are all red. So it says the Gemara, lo yisas kappa b'mnei same exact thing. So the first reason is a halachic one. It's a mum. It's a real blemish. The second one is not halachic. It's not halachic. It's practical. Right, there are different lumdas, different shitas. So the Gemara says, Tana mumin sha'amru b'fanav yodav v'raglav, an expansion of our Mishnah. When we say that a Kohen has a mum and he can't do the Nesias Kapayim, that's if the injury is by his face, his hands, or his feet. We assume maybe if you see a flaw in one, you'll check all the other parts of the body. Don't know, but that's what the Gemara says. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Yada bohaknios. If your hands have white spots on them, there's a disease like this called vitiligo. That's a disease where you have white splotches. So if you have it all over your hands or whatever the actual disease is, I don't know if it's vitiligo. Does the art scroll call it out? I didn't even look. That's white spots. Okay. Lo yisa is kappa. And there too.
Hands are spotted.
Yeah.
Loins.
What?
Loins.
What does that mean? Loins?
Rashi says, I don't know.
Oh, Rashi. I thought you were giving me an English word. Oh, wow.
Old French.
Yeah, classic David Mirza. I'm just going to pull an old French word out of the bank. Tanya Namihachi, the Bryce agrees with this idea. Yoda bohaknios, if his hands are spotted white, lo yisas kappa. As well, akumos akushos, if one's hands are curved, if they're bent. Some people have them when they have some malformations or disabilities in their hands. Lo yisas kappa, they're not allowed. Amravasi, Chifni, Uvashini, these people, we'll see soon who they are. Lo Yisas Kapav, they're not allowed to do Nesias Kapayim. And Tanya Namihachi, the Bryce writes, Emoridin Lifnei Ateva Lo Anshe Beishan, the people from Beishan are not allowed to do, they cannot be more than Lifnei Ateva, they can't be a Chazan. Lo Anshe Beis Chaifav, Lo Anshe Tzivonin. None of the people who live in these cities are allowed to be Chazan. Why? Mipnei, Shekor La Alfin Ainin, Ula Ainin Alfin. Because they mix up their ayins and their aleph, and it causes for big problems. You say one word the wrong way. It's like, for example, Ya'er with an aleph is he should make bright. Ya'er with an ayin is he should curse. So the Shulchan Aruch writes about this, that really, and there are very few people who are makbid on this. In my head, I wish I was, but I'm not. I wish I was. One of the people, one of the Shoshan boys, makbid gomer about this. All of his ayins are real gutturals. Ayin, like he does it right. The Shulchan Aruch writes that to be a chazan, you should distinguish between your aleph and your ayins because the words can translate totally differently. Kriyas HaTorah for sure. This morning I was in Shul. Ozzy Feifel was the chazan from Psukei de Zimra, liquid gold. Every word, it was perfect. He nailed every single word. That's real grammar. That's how we're supposed to be reading. He sounded almost Arabic, But that's what he was supposed to sound like with the ayins and the alephs. So these guys were not allowed to be chazanim. Amar le Reb Chia le Reb Shimon bar Rebbe. So Reb Chia says to Reb Shimon bar Rebbe, Reb Shimon the son of Rebbe, had you been a Levi, puzzle, you would not have been allowed to be on the duchan, doing Nesias Kapayim, mishum de ave kolcha. Your voice is very heavy, it's very thick, it's distinguishable from the others, and that's not how it should be. So Asa Amar Leila Avua. So Reb Shimon went to his father and told him what Reb Chia said about him. clearly the father was going to go to bat for his son. Amar Le, the father being Rebbe. Rebbe says, he says to his son Shimon, Amar Le, Zil Emale, go tell Reb Chia the following. When you get to the pasuk of V'chikisi LaHashem that I'm waiting for Hashem, Lo nimtzeis mecharef u'megadev. You are going to be one who curses Hashem. Why? Because what the Gemara is referring to is that Reb Chia always mixed up his cheses and his hays. Now look back at the pasuk. Instead of V'chikisi, it's V'hikesi. So says the Gemara, Reb Chia, you're not one to talk. Before you give a criticism about my son not being shaykh to the Leviyah for the Duchan, go get your hays and your cheses in order. So a little bit of a sharp dialogue. Amar Rav Huna, Zavlagan, a person who has a lot of tears. They cry a lot, not cry, but they tear a lot. Lo says kappa. There was a guy like this in Rav Huna's neighborhood who was teared a lot, and he was still doing the siyas kapayim. Says the Gemara, hu dash be'iru haba. Everybody knew about him. Tanya namihachi, the brisa writes, Zavlagan lo says kappa v'imhay dash be'iru mutter. Same exact idea, just in a brisa. One who tears a lot, as long as he's a regular to the people, then it's not distracting. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Suma ba'achas me'ena blind in one eye, lo he says kappa. That's not allowed. It says Gemara, why not? There was a guy who was blind in one eye in Rabbi Yochanan's neighborhood, and he did duchening all the time. It says the Gemara, hu dash be'iro hava, and the same thing. He was a regular. And Tanya namihachi, the Brisa writes the same thing. Suma ba'achas me'ena lo he says kappa. V'imay dash be'ino mutter be'iro mutter. If he was a regular, no problem. This is true for all of these things. That if a person happens to have a blemish of some kind, one that would distract. So the halacha is that as long as it's a regular, nothing to worry about. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mishe Hayuyadav Tzuos says kappa. The person's hands were colored. Tana imrov anshe ha'ir malachton bekach mutter. If everyone's hand, they're all co-workers, right? They're all mechanics. They're all cooks. Their hands are always dirty. So then fine. And then don't worry about it. No one's going to be distracted. You're one of many. You are dissolved in the majority. Last Mishnah on Gemara. Let's get through this. 10 lines or so from the bottom, a little bit less. Chaf Dalet Beis. Homer any over lifnei ateva b'tzivuin. If a person says, "I will,"
inside, aren't people not looking when the kohanim are duchening and raising their hands?
Supposed to be. The concern, that was the concern, is that because you're not allowed to look, you therefore can't have a kohen where you'd be tempted to look. So anyone who had a blemish or their hands were stained, because the psychology is, oh, he's missing a finger. You start watching him when he's doing his siyas kapayim, you see the shechina in your eye. It was a protective measure. Yeah. But no, you're not supposed to look. And the talis, I guess, helps if it's really covering the hands. Because the shechina should be in by the hands, no?
Yeah, I think that's the reason.
I think so. But the Gemara is assuming you're looking straight at the hands, that there's no talis here. That's not being discussed. So this is just to protect people's vision. So said this Mishnah could be very poorly interpreted. I'm just letting you know in advance. Ha'omer eini over lifnei ateva b'tzivoin. I will not go in front of the teva in colored clothing. So if you say that, then af belavanim lo yavor. Then even in white shirts and white clothes, you can't go either. And we'll see in the Gemara why. The sandal eini over. I'm not going to stand in front of I'm not going to daven for the tzibur with sandalim. So af yachif lo yavor. Then even without shoes, you're not allowed. Ha'oset tfilaso agula. Someone who makes their tefillin into an eagle, a circular or ovular shape. This assumes the whole tefillin, not just the top part, but the whole tefillin. Sakana, not only is it dangerous to you, but be'ein ba mitzvah, you're not yotzei, because the Torah requires of us that our tefillin be ribua, that it has to be squared. Nasna al mitzcho, if you put the tefillin on your forehead, o al pas yado, or actually on the top of your hand, by your hand, harei derech minus, because we don't interpret the pasuk that way. Al yodecha, Yodecha is your yad, but we wear it up on the arm. Between the eyes, but we wear it above the hairline. So this is derech minus, and in fact, halacha l'maisa, you're not yotzei. The Mishnah Berurah speaks about this as you may as well have your tefillin in your bag. Doesn't help. If your tefillin are too low, you are not yotzei. Period. If you used to have a hairline, whatever your initial hairline was, that's where your tefillin go. And if your hairline recedes, your tefillin go to the initial hairline. We always have to, that's a tough one, because there are people who are mamish not yotzei wearing tefillin. You're not yotzei tefillin if the tefillin is below your hairline. So what does it mean below your hairline? This is a discussion too. So some of the poskim say that I think this is my real hairline. I don't know, I might have lost a little bit. But if you can run your finger from your hand straight up and your tefillin are set behind your hands, you're good. It's better to go a little further back than a little further forward. The backward limit of the head is makom shatinok rofes, the fontanelle, which is actually pretty close to the front. It's really like almost just a couple inches from the hairline. That's normally where it is. By adults, the fontanelles are closed up. After a couple of years, the baby's fontanelles close up. But better to move your tefillin a little further back than a little more forward. This is why some people have a big problem with the big Chabad tefillin, these huge batim, because they don't have a good place to sit.
Gravity.
What?
It's called gravity.
It's also called gravity. It'll stretch the tefillin. That's also true. So one should be very careful about that. It's derech minus. That is not following halacha. That's its dukim. So then lastly, tzipa and zahav, you covered it in gold, the tefillin. Or v'nasna al beis unkeli shelo, or you put your tefillin on top of your own clothing. Hareza derech hachitzonim, you're an outsider. The Rashi explains over here, last short line, derech chitzonim b'nei adam haholchen acharei daitam chutz midas chachamim. Wow. So the chachamim said something. That's your job. You got to follow them. Let's learn the last few lines of this Gemara. My taima. What is the reason that we don't let this person daven if he says I won't daven with a colored shirt on? Chayshinan shema minus nizrikabo. Maybe we're concerned that he got overly attached to a foreign idea and therefore he's not eligible for davening anymore. What about oset tefillah so agula sakana vein b'mitzvah? Leima tanina lahad tanu rabbana. Maybe we learned this already. That we learned tefillin merubos halach l'moshe misinai. We know that tefillin have to be cubical or square. That's machlokas. What face of the thing has to be square, or is it 3 dimensions or 2? That's a discussion. So tefillin merubos halach l'moshe misinai. V'marava b'tifran. That's true of the stitching, and it's true uva alach sonan. If the angle has to be that way, which means that it has to be a 45, 45, 90 triangle. The angle has to be a perfect measure of the cut of that square. Amar Papa, no, that Mishnah it's not duplicative because Masnisan de'avida ki amguza. We're talking about a case where there's nothing at all square to even discuss. The tefillin in the Mishnah that we're discussing are like the shape of an egg or the shape of a small plum, whatever. It's nothing square at all. And if that's true, then it's not comparable at all. We'll stop right here at the bottom Mishnah on Chav Daled Amud Beis. We'll pick up tomorrow with Chav Hey. Wishing you all a beautiful night.